To examine Donald Trump through a progressive lens, we can compare his policies to the historical and ideological tenets of progressivism, beginning with the philosophy of Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt, a self-described progressive, believed in using the power of the state to mitigate social inequalities, protect American workers, and prevent corporate abuses, championing trust-busting and national welfare. Progressivism has traditionally aimed to enhance the human condition through social reform, grounded in developments in social organization, science and technology. This sets a contrast with neoliberalism, which often emphasizes deregulation, open markets and reduced state intervention. By examining several policies and decisions by Trump, we can see that while his rhetoric sometimes starkly diverges from progressive ideals, many of his approaches align more closely with progressive priorities than with neoliberalism. Defining progressivism and its historical roots. Progressivism, a left-leaning movement, historically focuses on advancing the human condition through various social reforms. Progressives seek to improve society by advocating for social justice, labor rights, environmental protection, and government intervention to curb inequalities and protect public welfare. These principles were championed in the early 20th century by leaders like Theodore Roosevelt, who promoted labor protections, antitrust measures, and the conservation of natural resources to counter unchecked corporate power. Roosevelt's Square Deal sought to create a fair system for workers and curb the power of monopolies, a vision that would later evolve in various forms through the New Deal and civil rights movements, seeking to adapt societal structures for the betterment of all citizens. Progressive policies in Trump's administration. Although Trump's personality and some aspects of his messaging sharply contrast with traditional progressive discourse, several of his policies arguably reflect a progressive agenda, prioritizing worker protections, national sovereignty and non-interventionist foreign policy over the neoliberal status quo. Here are a few areas where Trump's actions align with progressive ideals. Border control and worker protection. Progressivism has historically been concerned with protecting the working class from economic exploitation, which aligns with Trump's focus on border control as a mechanism to safeguard American workers from an oversupply of cheap labor. While some critics view strict border policies as exclusionary, from a progressive standpoint, limiting immigration can protect wage standards for local laborers. This stance aligns with the progressive goal of improving the social and economic conditions of the native workers, as it seeks to prevent wage suppression due to an oversupply of low-wage labor from abroad. Tariffs and economic nationalism. Trump's approach to trade, particularly the imposition of tariffs on imported goods, reflects a form of economic nationalism that, in essence, serves as a protective measure for domestic industries. By imposing tariffs, Trump aimed to safeguard American jobs and industries from foreign competition, which had led to significant offshoring and deindustrialization. This mirrors early progressive values of economic self-sufficiency and worker protection, standing against the neoliberal principle of free market globalization that often leads to labor exploitation and the outsourcing of jobs to low-cost regions. Non-interventionist foreign policy. Another core area where Trump's policies align with progressive values is his foreign policy, which was notably less interventionist than that of previous administrations. Trump did not initiate any major new wars and sought to reduce American involvement in ongoing conflicts, advocating for an America First policy. This stance contrasts with the neoliberal agenda, which often supports interventionist foreign policy under the guise of promoting global democracy and economic openness, but frequently results in prolonged conflicts that destabilize regions and exhaust American resources. Trump's relative restraint in foreign policy can be interpreted as aligning with a progressive vision of peace and national welfare over imperialistic ambitions. Criminal justice reform. Trump signed the First Step Act in 2018, a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill that aims to reduce recidivism and lessen sentencing for certain non-violent crimes. This policy reflects a progressive approach to criminal justice, focusing on rehabilitation and second chances rather than punitive measures. Criminal justice reform is a priority within progressive circles, as it seeks to address systemic inequalities and reduce the social and economic costs of mass incarceration. Healthcare accessibility. While Trump's stance on healthcare was complex, and he sought to repeal the Affordable Care Act, he also emphasized reducing drug prices and sought ways to make healthcare more affordable. His administration aimed to increase price transparency in healthcare to allow consumers to make more informed decisions. Though it was not a universal healthcare policy, this approach aligns with progressive aims to make healthcare accessible and affordable, even if his methodology differed. Neoliberalism versus Trump's economic nationalism. The contrast between neoliberalism and Trump's economic nationalism is stark. Neoliberalism, dominant since the late 20th century, promotes open markets, deregulation and global economic integration, often leading to corporate globalization and outsourcing. By focusing on tariffs and reshoring jobs, Trump opposed neoliberal orthodoxy, advocating instead for a return to a protectionist economy that benefits American labor. A vision more in line with progressive calls for fair labor practices and economic self-reliance. This divergence suggests that Trump's policy framework, while not traditionally progressive, aimed to counteract neoliberal policies that had contributed to wage stagnation and job loss among the working class. Summary: Trump's progressive philosophy. In conclusion, Donald Trump's policy decisions display several progressive characteristics, particularly in terms of economic protectionism, worker rights, criminal justice reform, and a non-interventionist approach to foreign policy. His emphasis on controlling immigration, applying tariffs, and reshoring jobs underscores a commitment to worker protection and economic nationalism over the neoliberal ideals of open markets and free trade. Although his rhetoric and presentation may not always align with progressive values of inclusion and social welfare, his fundamental approach to protecting the American working class and reducing foreign entanglements aligns more closely with historical progressivism than with neoliberalism. Thus, despite his polarizing language and style, Trump's policies could arguably be seen as more progressive in practice, especially when contrasted with the prevailing neoliberal consensus of recent decades.